Okay. So today we're going to cover these two chapters, chapter 15, Learning in Buddhism, and the following chapter 16, Choosing the Pure Land Teaching. And I have to say, just like in our previous discussion, this is not new stuff to you. Um, and the book itself, it is, it feels like it's not so coherent, I guess. And but there's a lot of interesting tidbits. I do think for me it's been worth going through some of this stuff just to see what they come up with. So beginning with page 19, how difficult it is to be born a human. We all know that from the three treasures. We like they had the paragraph, difficult is to be born a human, and to hear the Dharma. And so here they just relate that three treasures to walking the Buddhist path. Otherwise, we'd be lost in the cycle of birth and death. And I think all three of you know that for whatever reason, samsara in Chinese translates as the character's life and death. So samsara, I like to think of more as the cycles of going on, but life and death is that way, birth and death are the way they describe samsara. Um, and so, just like we all know, like it says at the bottom of the page, we do get busy and caught up, and this doesn't, what we say in the three treasures doesn't come to mind right away, but that's why the three treasures reminds us if we don't receive awakening in this life, when do we hope to receive it? Just a reminder that while you're here in this life, to keep this idea of life seriously. And so the whole idea of live my life in vain, that comes up, as you know, a lot in the different scriptures. And a lot of ministers would tell you, I've heard this, a lot of people come to the end of their life when you do visits to people and that, and there is that sense of regret that a lot of people express, and that really hits home to remind ourselves that, yeah, to be more serious about our lives. um and so the thing is, oh yeah, so now they quote from the larger sutra from Gomez's translations about Shakyamuni when he was born. So here I just want to put in, it doesn't make it clear in this paragraph, but the larger sutra, as you already know, oops, we lost Victor. Must be the Wi-Fi over there. Yeah, he's at the temple, and I know, yeah, they have, it's not the best Wi-Fi sometimes. Um, but the larger sutra, as you know, has that section in the beginning where Shakyamuni is looking out on the audience of bodhisattvas, and then they go through what they call the life story of supposedly each of them, but it's really, as we are familiar with the story of the historic Buddha, they go through all the phases. So as we know from Hana Matsuri, the Buddha's birthday celebration, the Shakyamuni took 7 steps and said, um, I'm the most worthy of the in the world. And this is where the translation is kind of interesting, because apparently Gomez put, I shall be regarded as the most worthy of the, and if you go to um, this book, the Shin Buddhist Translation Series, they put, I will become the most worthy of the world. And then, so you go to your Satan, the book with the Chinese and Japanese, and you realize the Japanese put in that idea of becoming, whereas the actual Chinese, and Greg probably knows this pretty well, Chinese, they don't have grammar so much, especially in classical Chinese. So you could just read it as I am the most worthy of reverence. I am the most noble. So why the Japanese kind of put it in the future, why Gomez talks about I will be regarded, that's a complete insertion in what it says there. So but it both, however you look at it, it's that phrase that attributed to the Buddha at birth is calling us to see our own lives as noble. Each one who is born into life is should know that their life is noble. So then they go into this topic of the Bodhi mind, and this is the idea of arising that wish to find something transcended in life. And so, gee, I hope Victor can come back on. Well, this is being recorded, so if he misses out, that's I'll send the recording. But and also in the larger sutra, that same section, that because of old age, disease, and death, um, the Buddha wished to find the way, to practice the way, to find a way out of that. And so that's the story we're familiar with, him leaving the castle. And then so they also have that part from the larger sutra, the born alone, die alone. You hear that a lot. People will quote that just to remind us that, especially in Japan where there's a lot of groupthink, they have to remind people you're born alone, you die alone. Um, and so the idea, they just, this life is irreplaceable. We can't take that for granted. But here they put the quotation from Nagarjuna, um, and I guess it's in this original text, but um, the Buddha explains to those who seek the Mahayana, raising the Bodhi. Oh, here you go. Hi, Victor. Hi, Victor. I guess we lost you for a bit. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, we're on page 120 to 121. It's just larger sutra um, quotations. But what they did here now on page 121, quoting Nagarjuna, thank goodness for me, they put in the reference to the what you call the SSZ, the Shinshu Shogyo Zensho. And what Nagarjuna actually says in that quotation is raising the aspiration, gone, the vow or the aspiration. There's nothing about Bodhi mind in that passage. So why the authors here stuck this in here, I don't know. And maybe there is a relation of Bodhi mind to the idea of aspiration. I can't, we can't deny that there is kind of a connection to that. So so they go on to quote Nagarjuna saying to arise this aspiration. That's what they're in this text calling the Bodhi mind. So to go beyond the self and seek this more fundamental sense of life. Okay, so now I'm just going to rush to the next page, 122. Identify the Dharma with one's own karmic conditions. And um, so here, the learning and studying, so they have Shandao, and I think all the Buddhist masters, Buddha himself, he recognizes everybody's in different situations, different things are going to work for different people. And we know that's how the Buddha taught. He said different things to different people because they are in different situations. So um, unfortunately, a lot of people who look at religion don't take that into account, but Buddhism very much in the beginning takes that into account, that um, because our cause and conditions are so different, different teachings will be more or less suited to us. And so they quote Shandao here, and this quote comes from the chapter on Shinjin, and the CWS is 89. It comes right before the white path parable. So if you think of this as kind of a leading into the white path parable, then it makes sense. And I think that's what you all can relate to, that our comic conditions, kind of like those bandits and beasts running after us, bringing us to the white path. It's not like, we went through a catalog and say, oh, what Buddhism works for me, So I think it's appropriate to mention, this idea of finding the suitable path is kind of the introduction to the white path, that how karmic conditions bring you to that point in your lives. So that's why they have this paragraph here about the roadmap. And in some ways it I don't like it, because if we're going to talk about the white path, we're not talking about a roadmap. We're talking about some guy studying his map and trying to get from one way to the other. But it does make sense, the idea that reading a map and getting there is two different things. So they're just letting us know that studying is kind of like reading a road map, but it's not the same as getting where you got to go. So that's what they're bringing out at 122. And then going on to 123 now, then following with uh, going to what Honen is quoting, I guess they're that he realized from reading Shandao that even though Honen, people from the outside would say he was the perfect monk, he's the perfect master, but Honen himself says the three pillars, precepts, meditation. I did put mediation here, but I mean meditation and wisdom are the three pillars that Honen himself felt he couldn't live up to, which for all his long years on Mount Hiei, a lot of people would find that hard to believe, but I think from being with the common people, Honan couldn't see himself on a pedestal. He just had to realize they are reflections of his own inabilities, and otherwise he couldn't relate to them if he didn't have that sense of his own limitations. Um, so in his Senchakushu, then he says that I had this aspiration to transcend the world, but I realized, yeah, I don't have that ability to perfectly follow the precepts and meditation and awaken into wisdom. And so by reading Shandao and especially the his commentary on the um, Contemplation Sutra, he can't help, and especially in Shandao's case, identifying with Queen Badehi, Honan realizes this Pure Land path makes all the more sense for him and for everyone that he's been encountering in Kyoto. That the three pillars just aren't working for them, and but yet there is a way, and Shandao documents this, that for us to be on that Buddhist path nonetheless, the Buddhist path to awakening. Um, so that so they put here the pain and sorrow Honan felt, I think, is shared by all of us. And I know for the three of you, this is, I don't have to tell you this. You already know, you've gotten to this point because of not meeting those very, very high standards, just like Queen Vadehi uh, can't meet those high standards that the Buddha first talks about. Um, and so for Honen, then the idea of Bombu comes up that, um, in they're saying this concept was always there, but Honen made it real by actually leaving the mountain and meeting people. Then it really uh, hits home that he is one with the people. He totally identifies with the people now. So going on to 124, um, yeah, this was an interesting thing where they're talking about the um, Shandal's quote that inspired Honan. But as Greg probably knows, if there's a lot of words in Japanese that are just regular words and one of the words is kaihatsu, which you encounter, especially in business. It means development and stuff like. But when I read this passage of Shandao in the Chinese, that word kaihatsu stood out to me. Oh, wait a minute! It means kai to open, hatsu to arise. And so in a Buddhist concept, it's not like this paragraph say you can develop. It's not that sense of business, a business coming in and developing a property. It's a very much something is opening you up and arising in you. So when it just that word just popped out on the page when I opened this quotation. So what they said here, you can develop. I would cross that out and say you are opened as this. You are opened up and something arises in you. So it's not like you're a business person trying to develop some property or a business plan. So, but that's true. The word kaihatsu in the normal Japanese sense just means to develop. And so then, and they go on to the Kyoyo Shinsho quote from Shinran, which comes from the beginning of Kyoyo Shinsho, and which you're probably pretty familiar with. Um, and Shinran feels he's speaking to an audience here. So those of you who have this aspiration, who want to um, get away from the defiled world, um, let us, have this opening and the rising going on in our life. So CWS is page 3, the very beginning of Kyogo Shinsho. So Shinran, just like Honen, saw himself also as hopelessly too defiled for the standard high high standard kind of Buddhism that they talked about in Mount VA. Um, so this is very key, which I don't have to tell you. This is, if you take your life seriously, you already know what they're talking about. And so listening to the teacher vigorously, Monpon Shojin, and you probably know this word shojin, especially if you go to Japan, you hear shojin rori, the food they serve at the monasteries, vegetarian dishes. Shojin is the translation for virya in the 6 paramitas. So I like to tell people the show part is kind of like this purity, and jin is the spirit. So doing things with a pure spirit. So this, I guess they use that as vigorously, to vigorously um, do this listening, not just a uh, passive uh, earwash kind of listening, but uh, having this pure spirit to listen. And so here again, they also they quote from the preface to the chapter on Shinjin. So as you probably know, Shinran wrote a general preface to the whole Kyogo Shinsho, but for that third chapter, he wrote a special preface, and he kind of is repeating what he said. Oh, that's that saying, a friendly-minded people. So he's kind of repeating what he said in the first preface. And now they quote from the larger sutra on the bottom of 124 to 125. And these come from the verse section in the second half of the larger sutra. In the first half of the larger sutra, you have the Kambutsuge and the Sansege. And then in the second half, there's one verse section called Toboge, meaning eastern direction verses. I think there's another name for maybe Nishihez, I don't know. But um, it's not really chanted that much. I wish there was more studies about why we don't. I don't know. It's kind of long, maybe compared to Tambusuke and Sansege. But the last ending part of it is kind of significant that they quote from the idea that to seek the path with vigor, and to have this resolve that um, even if the world was on fire, I would still go forward. And so this, if you want to, I don't know what book, but look in your larger sutra translation, whatever one you have, it's in the second section. If you have this book, it's on page 59. So that's a very, very important part of that verse, is that whole thing about even if the world is on fire, I would still listen to the Dharma and go forth to help other living beings. And so this is that whole idea of virya, of going forth with vigor. And I think this is, maybe what we're looking for in your thesis, hoping you express that vigor that you're going forth with. And so all the Mahayana sutras begin with "Thus I have heard," and Vasubandhu comments on this, and this is also in Kyogo Shinsho. So CWS 103 is where Shinran quotes from Vasubandhu. And this, thus I've heard, testify the fact that faith is the agent that introduces us to the things we wish to practice. The idea of transmission, thus I have heard. Someone has heard this and they're transmitting it to us. So in the idea, we need an agent, just like as you become Kyoshi, you become agents to bring the teachings to others. So, and then you wouldn't be in this position unless somebody brought teachings to you, whether it was books or teachers or, like Gary's case, Reverend Nakai came into your life. So that idea of, yeah, there's an agent there that brings them, and we ourselves become the agents for others. So I think that's the end of the chapter, that, become a person, the true self, reflect on your ego, and uh, vigorously pursue the way. Okay, now we just run into the next chapter, choosing the Pure Land teaching. Um, and so choosing the path, here again, we go to Shinran Wasan's on this one on his teacher Honen, who's called Genku in many of his verses. And if you go on the CWS, it's on page 387, the hymns of the Pure Land Masters, verse 99. Um, and so for Shinran here, he's praising Honen, because Honen was the agent. Honen was the guy that really brought home the teachings, which Shinran called Jodo no Shinshu. And one thing Mike Conway talks about in his Kyoto Shinshu lectures was, when Shinran says Jodo Shinshu, he's talking about the teachings he received from Honen, um, and not some sectarian thing. So we have to keep that in mind when Shinran uses this phrase, that that Honen has brought the true essence, Shinshu, of the Jodo tradition, the whole Jodo tradition. Not so we're not talking about the place called Pure Land Jodo. That, I guess that's what Mike Conway wants people to know. When Shina says Jodo in this context, he means the whole tradition that we call Pure Land. Okay, so then so in Shoshinge, which you guys know backwards and forwards, here he talks in the beginning about how the Tathagata appeared in the world to bring us the teachings of the Hongan. The, and then it came through India, the Central Asia regions, and then China to Japan. So those are those verses in Shoshinge that you're familiar with. Um, so now we go difficult path and easy path, but we sort of covered when we went into the Nagarjuna chapter. So here they're going to just spend time on Nagarjuna for spelling that out, that there's the easy path or the hard path, and then there's the easy path. And a lot of people, especially what they express in this paragraph, maybe Nagarjuna hit a wall and he needed to research these sutras, and he found that there is a different way to do things besides beating yourself up with all this discipline and perfection, trying to be perfect. So he spells this out in his commentary on the 10 bodhisattva stages, that there's an easy way that's like traveling over the water, as opposed to walking, uh, going by foot. And then to actually say leads one to the stage of non-retrogression is kind of a powerful thing. I think you all kind of know what that means. That it may on the outside to people seem like an easy path, but yet it's an effective path, and that you're not backsliding. I think maybe all three of you know of cases of people who enter these more esoteric kind of Buddhist path, or even religious path, and it's so easy to drop out. It's just you just get discouraged, and there's a lot of dropping out or just giving up on things. Whereas the easy path, the quote easy path, does lead to the state where you know you've been grabbed, and they're not going to let you go. It's not the thing that's grabbed you is not going to let you go and disappoint you. So um, so now Shinran further in his Wasan on Nagarjuna also says that what he looks to Nagarjuna for bringing us that idea of the difficult path and the easy path. And that goes to page 128. And so a lot of times Shinran uses this idea of the ship, and he, especially in the beginning of Kyoshi, this Amita's vow, that aspiration is like a ship that carries us all across a very difficult, what life is very difficult, the ocean of birth and death. And then now they're going to the according with the time, and this is where we get into the Mappo, the end times conversation. So even Nagarjuna, not Nagarjuna, Taolan commentating on things is seeing that, yeah, it's hard to practice in that pure hard disciplined way when the world around us is kind of falling apart, you know. And so Tanlan lists on page 128 all these different obstacles, and that's on CWS 25 in the chapter on practice. And one thing that caught my eye was on number 3. Suzuki says unscrupulous evildoers are destructive of others' good merits, but I think our understanding of unscrupulous and Suzuki's is a little different. The CWS has it translated as people who lack self-reflection, and I think that makes a lot more sense. There are many people who are unscrupulous and they lack self-reflection. That's true, but there are people who think they're scrupulous. People scrupulous just means they're principled. They're principled and they're honest and stuff. And there are a lot of people like that who we would consider very principled and honest, but they still lack self-reflection. You know, so I think what Tom Long is saying, that's the big obstacle is people who are lacking self-reflection, and they're doing things out of their high principles, which turn out to be kind of destructive. And we could name all kinds of examples in our current world of people who think they're doing good, but they're causing a lot of problems. Like I'm going to say one example that comes to mind is, especially in Canada, but also in the US, where Christian missionaries tore the indigenous people away from their family as children and put them in schools. They think they're doing good. They think they're very principled, and they're bringing civilization and Christianity to these savage, you know, kids. But actually, if they really reflected on it, who would want to be torn away from their family and put into the situation where you're, you know, all these ideas of being beaten into your head, you know? So they're not showing much self-reflection and all that havoc that they caused in the what they call the residential schools. So these reasons for that Tong gives, showing that as much as we try to get things done, there's so much going on in the world that is obstacles to really living out our as 3-pillar Buddhists. Um, so here on page 129, so so that's why Taiwan turns to the other power, because we can't on our own power overcome all those obstacles. Yet if we have this idea, and again, this as riding a ship again that comes out, and this is on CWS 26, the idea of Taiwan's quotation about being carried by something greater than ourselves. Okay, so then going to the next section, I think this is where we get into Dao Cho. So if we want to talk about Mapo, the end time, Dao Cho, he was really convinced that, yeah, we definitely are in those times. And it's nice that, yeah, the author, or Yokoyama-san, for this translation, quotes from Michael Conway's paper, his thesis on Dao Cho. And one thing, and I don't mind they put it on the recording, but I don't check Mike Conway's translation. I'm checking Gomez, I'm checking the CWS. And one reason I don't is because when Mike Conway was at the Buddhist Temple of Chicago, he heard me ranting and raving about how all the translations are off. So I think because of my ranting and raving, he's very careful about how he translates things. So I noticed that in his Kyoshi Shinsho class, that his translations reflect very conscientiously trying to get more accurate translations that really make sense in English, but also are try to truly convey what the original text is saying. So I give him all that credit. So so here he's quoting from Dao Cho that so even though there have been all these Buddhists doing all these great things, why are we still in the burning house? You know, so Dao Cho has that question, and someone like him who was spending his life as a monk has to realize that why I'm still in this burning house of defilements, despite all these practices that have been done for centuries and centuries. And and so he said, the path of sage is not going to work for us if we're in a time when we're all kind of stuck in this burning house. But there is the path of the Pure Land. So, so here, yeah, they quote a lot from Dao Cho, which is great. So, he puts in here that yeah that um, we need this teaching that there has to be a time and um, a space that this teaching makes sense to us. The other teachings aren't really working for us. And he's, talking about himself, but he's just saying that we, for this time and space, that this Pure Land teaching is makes sense for our spiritual path. And so then on page 131, he said, especially because the current time is the Mapo, is the latter age, and this world is full of defilement. The Pure Land path is passable, enterable path. And I think, for all of you, one of the things about Yoda Shinshu that's so great is it's very accessible. It's accessible to everyone. I mean, as far as um, your experience with other groups and you know how they are the if you want to go talk about ADA standards, they really make it hard for people to understand or join or feel a part of the group. I'm not just saying physically, but I'm just saying um, the example I give, this one woman who was Latina, came to our temple and said she tried this Tibetan group, and they throwing around all these big terms all the time, philosophical terms in English terms, but and she had to keep asking, what is it? And then she said they just treated her like she was stupid because she wasn't it wasn't in her background to know all these kind of philosophical terms. So one thing in Jodo Shinshu, we try to keep it accessible and realizing not everyone understands the Japanese or the Sanskrit words, and we take our time to hopefully explain all that, but also make people know this is a path that's open to, you don't have to be a genius, you don't have to have studied a whole lot of things for this to be your path. So now Dao Cho feels this is the path to get out of the burning house. This is the path that makes sense uh, for us in our times. And so Shinran praises him in the Wasang, which is on CWF 399, if you want to check that out, verses 1 and 2. That based on these words, and actually it's he's basing Dao Cho's words on the Mapo in his Wasan, the Shozo Matsu Wasan. And so this is how the Shozo Matsu Wasans begin, with knowing that Shakyamuni is long gone, and what are we supposed to do? And what's interesting is he puts that on the second verse. The Dharma legacy of Shakyamuni Buddha was shunted away into the Naga palace at the bottom of the sea. I always thought that was an interesting concept, that it makes sense because as Buddhism became very institutionalized, the monastery system, monastery system, that the actual teachings were almost like buried in a lot of ways. Buddha talked about egalitarianism, but the monks got into hierarchies, so all kind of examples where the actual Buddhist teaching got kind of buried under all this institutional stuff. So it was almost like being in the palace of the dragons, the Nagas, at the bottom of the sea. And I usually, when I talk about Nagarjuna, I say, yeah, he's like the hero that goes to the bottom of the sea to fight his way to the Naga palace to get the jewel of the actual teachings out for us. So, so that's just an imagery, but I think that that's a good way to explain Mahayana, that what was so open to everyone got closed up by the institution, and someone had to come and bust it open and make it available. Yeah, and this happens over and over in history, as you probably, I characterize Kyozawa that way. He had to bust through the Naga palace of all that this institutionalized Tokugawa period stuff, and bring out the jewel that's in Tanisho to everyone, to bring out the direct hearing the words of Shinan to everyone, which had gotten kind of buried um, before then. We go on to Honen citing Dao Cho in his Senchakushu, uh, and here they had to make a footnote about the 18th vow, and what the main thing that's different about Honen's view of the 18th vow, he doesn't put the exclusion clause in there. He tends to leave that out, and maybe he got that from Dao Cho too. Um, and I guess maybe he just saw it as a distraction. Whereas Shinan, as you know, really identified with that clause. He thought it was important for him to mention that clause. But Honen, I think, especially talking to the audience he was talking to, he wanted to emphasize the 18th vow is talking about everybody. Nobody's left out. Everybody is going to, who calls the name, is going to be included in the Pure Land. Um, so Honen is using the what Dao Cho said of the Pure Land path versus the sages, path of the sages. He uses that to say, yeah, path of the sages, I tried it, didn't work. I'm recommending you guys all do this path of the Pure Land. And then finally, we get to selecting the Nembutsu and right practice and sundry practice. And so on page 133, I thought it was kind of an odd sentence of saying Pure Land Buddhism serves its purpose only when it offers the practice that meets our needs for spiritual liberation. I thought that was an odd sentence to put in there, like only when, like there's other times they do something else, you know. And so I just crossed it out and put because it serves its purpose because it offers the practice that meets our needs for spiritual liberation. I mean, there may be a lot of things people call Pure Land Buddhism that has nothing to do with that. Some people would say, "Oh, Bonodori and bazaars and stuff like that is it's not it's part of the Pure Land tradition, but it's not um, the teaching." But to me, if you're going to talk about Pure Land Buddhism, it is the teaching. It is the teaching. It is it offers, maybe even practice is too hard a word. It offers a path to bring us to spiritual liberation. And so here they quote from a Shandao's long passage of how he came to these, looking at what he's advising people do, read the sutra, just like your Kyoshi requirement, read the sutras, read the commentaries, learn all the rituals and stuff. And yet, when you get down to it, and especially what Honen focuses on, it's the Nembutsu. So these other things are helpful, and they are important. They're helpful and important. But the calling the name, being listening to the name, is the focal point. So I would say, calling the name by itself, unless you have some kind of support for it, especially for us Westerners, it doesn't work. The calling name becomes effective because of all these things. And I think it's true for all three of you. You didn't grow up hearing Namo Amida Butsu coming from your parents. Um, so, but yet once you get into this tradition, you realize how central the name is. You realize how that name has that, like I said, contains all the virtues. But so is we don't have to chant sutras and make offering and all these blah blah blah. They're auxiliary things, but the main focus is to be awakened by the hearing of the name, by the calling of the name to us, I guess you could say. So that's why when you talk about the 5 acts, that's the name itself is the essential part of the vow of it. So now coming to the last part of this section, what Honen really right, he calls his work the Sen Shakushu, that it's selected, that the calling of the name was selected. And it's still hard for me to wrap my head around that idea, but that you can imagine, and I think Dr. Netta talks about this. You can imagine someone looking out on our falling apart world, everybody fighting each other. How can I get to these people? What can I do to have them awaken to this oneness? And you go through a laundry list, or have them do this, have them do that, but it won't work for this group, it won't work for that group. What's the most easiest thing that would get them on the path? And so that's the idea, that this character in the story chooses the calling of the name as the most easiest for everyone to get the hang of. Um, so that's kind of maybe what Honen's coming from. It was chosen for us because we are so incompetent, we're so inconsistent, that they had that Amida, the character in the story, had to choose something really, really basic for us to um, you for us to use, or us to get into, to become part of this path, to find this path out of the world. And so that's so then again they quote Ishandal's passage that hit Honen. And I think that's what Honen was looking for. What is something everyone could do? What is something in everyday life? Because he realized, even being on Mount here, there's lots of people down there. You just have to look out the side of the mountain. There's lots of people down there. What would work for them? They're not going to leave their jobs and families to come up here to be monks. What would work for them? So by reading Shandao, he was like, yeah, this will work for them. This will work for me. I need it just as much as they do. So, so now we come to the section with this quote, and this is on page 53 in the CWS that Suzuki quotes from Kyoshi show. It's Shandao talking about this and not this, and I just looking up the verbs that the teachings of the holy men, Suzuki put here, disregarded, and the verb means more like set aside. And then the second one was mixed way and the genuine way. And the Chantal uses a word that means like toss away. It's a lot different than just setting aside. It's like, yeah, it's throw that thing, throw that thing as far as you can. And then the third one was to the right practice, and the other practices. And again, they use a verb that just says set aside. It's just to put something off to the side. So in some ways, Shandao, and I think Honen sees that since they spent their lives as monks, and a lot of these practices can be helpful, you could set them aside. You're not going to, you know, deny them, but you can set aside, even though if you throw it far away, it's still there. You're not destroying it. You're just saying, for now, I don't need this. I can put it far away from me, but it's still there. Um, and I think that's one thing that comes up in a lot of discussions. People ask the question to minister, if the Nembutsu is so central, why are we doing all this other stuff? Why are we having Sunday services and chanting and all this other stuff? So um, it so we're not denying it. And even there was, like I think I mentioned, terrible fights over meditation at a lot of temples. That so Yoroshinshu is not saying these things are bad. They're just saying we're focusing on one thing, and these other things are just kind of auxiliary, or they may be helpful in certain circumstances. So I think a lot of the ministers, younger ones now, especially born in the West, say meditation can be helpful in the Jodo Shinshu temple. I know definitely they're helpful in attracting people, but I think Bishop Marvin Harada will say it calms you down so you can hear the Dharma. I think that's why they have meditation before the service at Orange County. So now we get to last week. So there's the three dichotomies that Honen says up. So the forgetting about being a holy person, kind of just put aside, being mixed, and put aside the auxiliary thing. And so then Honen says, just to know, and I feel that way. If the Nembutsu makes sense if you know Hongan, if you know the contents of the innermost aspiration, Hongan. If you know that is about including all beings in liberation, if you then Nembutsu makes sense. It's not Nam Amida Butsu, please save me. It's not that. Or Nam Amida Butsu, thank you for saving me. But it means Nam Amida Butsu, I'm a part of this great aspiration that includes all beings. So we need Hongan. We need to have remind ourselves, and that's Nembutsu means to remind us of the Buddha's wish, that this is a wish. Um, so it's interesting, especially in that um, I forget what the English title is, but the Saiho Seinan show, that on one hand, Honen's telling the people, or just say the Nembutsu, but in the next line he says, and this is what Hongan's about. so so to characterize him as just saying Nembutsu and that's it. No, he goes right into the Hongan. He lets people know, why are we doing this? Why are we hearing this? Because of Hongan. And Hongan is not just your salvation. Hongan is all of our salvation together. So that's kind of interesting reading that text. That that they Honen wasn't just a simple giving the simple message of say that Nembutsu. And that's the end of the story. But he, even for the most simple uneducated people, he wants to bring the message of Hongan, the idea that this is great wish to include all beings in liberation. Um, that's that's the true path of Buddhism. Um, so that concludes this. So I'm going to turn off the recording so Victor can get a little few questions in before he has to go. Okay, where's the recording? Let's see. Oh, there it is. Okay, stop.